The proclamation hit like a shockwave, reverberating across every corner of the Galactic Assembly. Humans are hereby prohibited from providing medical assistance to non-human species under any circumstances. Dr. Julian Kerrigan read the directive on his datapad, the bold text standing stark against the screen's pale blue glow. His stomach churned with anger and guilt as he paced the observation deck of Xanthal 7, a sprawling interstellar hub known for its chaotic blend of commerce and diplomacy. Around him, alien life thrummed. Traders, dignitaries, and workers shuffled, glided, or hovered through the station's polished corridors. Normally, he found comfort in the bustling diversity, but today the scene felt oppressive. The decree had been coming for weeks, and Julian knew exactly why. The memory of the incident was still raw, especially for him. A human doctor, a brilliant but reckless, had tried to save the life of Juralin Mask, an influential ambassador of the Zoran Confederacy. What should have been a routine emergency procedure had gone catastrophically wrong. The doctor had used adrenaline, a substance humans relied on in critical moments, without understanding its effect on Zoran physiology. For their species, the compound was a deadly neurotoxin. Juralin died within seconds, their scaled body convulsing violently before a room full of horrified witnesses. The backlash was immediate and merciless. The Zoran Confederacy demanded sanctions against humanity, claiming humans were a danger to galactic stability. The Assembly, already wary of humanity's unorthodox methods, acted swiftly to avoid further outrage. The decree was the result, a sweeping ban on humans treating non-humans, regardless of the circumstances. Julian stopped pacing and leaned heavily against the railing, staring out at the nebula beyond the station's transparent walls. The incident hadn't been his fault, but it had tarnished the reputation of every human doctor in the galaxy. The ban wasn't just a professional blow, it was personal. "What do they think we are, walking plagues?" he muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. "You're not far off." Julian turned to see his colleague Arlem, a lanky lothite with translucent skin that shimmered faintly under the station's lights. Arlem's species were known for their calm, deliberate nature, and he often served as a voice of reason for Julian. Arlem approached, his luminous eyes narrowing with concern. "You've read the directive, I assume." "Of course I've read it," Julian snapped, gesturing with the datapad. "It's idiotic. Joralin's death was a tragedy, but banning every human from treating aliens? That's overkill." Arlem tilted his head, his mandibles clicking faintly, a sound Julian had come to interpret as a thoughtful pause. "It's not about fairness, Julian. The Assembly doesn't understand your methods, and after Joralin's death, they don't want to take risks. Your biology is chaotic. It's hard for most species to believe you even survive your own physiology, let alone anyone else's." "Chaotic?" Julian scoffed, though he couldn't entirely disagree. Humans were an anomaly in the galaxy, an unpredictable mix of resilience and recklessness. They survived extreme conditions, thrived on stress, and consumed substances that were toxic to other species. It was part of what made them adaptable, but it also made them frightening. Arlem's mandibles clicked again, this time in what Julian recognized as amusement. "You can't deny it. Your people heal yourselves with techniques that seem equal parts science and madness. To the Assembly, that makes you dangerous." "We're not dangerous," Julian retorted. "We're adaptable. That's why we're good at what we do. But instead of trying to understand us, they just slap a ban on us and call it a solution." Arlem folded his arms, his luminous skin dimming slightly, a sign of unease. "Adaptability can be alarming, Julian, especially when it comes without predictability. Some species in the Assembly still argue that humanity was admitted too soon." Before Julian could respond, the station's announcement system crackled to life. A voice, sharp and formal, echoed through the corridors. "Attention! A delegation from the Kaltorian Empire will arrive shortly. All personnel are instructed to maintain protocol and prepare for a high-security escort." Julian frowned, straightening. The Kaltorians were one of the galaxy's most powerful and enigmatic species. Their leader, Sovereign Varnax, a figure of near mythical status. Known for his imposing presence and political cunning, Varnax had brokered peace treaties that spanned centuries and was revered by his people as a living symbol of unity. The announcement immediately shifted the station's atmosphere. Security forces moved into position, their armor gleaming under the artificial lights, and a palpable tension settled over the crowd. "We should move," Arlam said, his voice low. "High-profile visits always bring chaos, and you don't need more trouble today." Julian nodded reluctantly, following Arlam as they weaved through the throng of aliens. The corridors buzzed with whispers of Sovereign Varnax's arrival. But as they neared the central atrium, a shrill alarm tore through the air. The sound wasn't a standard security alert, it was the unmistakable signal for a medical emergency. Julian's instincts kicked in immediately. Without thinking, he turned toward the sound, weaving through the crowd with practiced speed. "Julian, wait!" Arlam called after him, but Julian was already gone. He arrived at the source of the commotion, a cluster of Kaltorian guards surrounding a figure lying motionless on the polished floor. The guards' golden armor shimmered in the light, but their expressions were tight with panic. Julian craned his neck, catching a glimpse of the figure they protected. A massive Kaltorian, clad in ceremonial robes, their golden skin dulled and their breathing labored. Sovereign Varnax? Julian's medical training surged to the forefront. The Sovereign's condition was critical. Anyone could see that. Without hesitation, Julian stepped forward. "Let me help!" he shouted, raising his voice above the din. The nearest guard turned on him, their broad face twisted with fury. "Stand back, human! This does not concern you!" Julian held up his hands, his tone firm but measured. "I'm a doctor. If you don't let me examine him, he could die." Another guard stepped forward, their expression colder. "The decree forbids human intervention. You will not touch the Sovereign." Julian's frustration boiled over. "This isn't about the decree. This is about saving his life. Are you seriously going to let him die because of politics?" The guards didn't budge. One of them muttered into a communicator, likely summoning Kaltorian medics. Arlam arrived moments later, slipping through the crowd to stand beside Julian. His luminous eyes darted between Julian and the guards. "Julian, don't. You can't help him. Not under these circumstances." Julian turned on him, incredulous. "You see his condition. He doesn't have time to wait for medics who might not even know what's happening." Arlam placed a hand on Julian's shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "If you intervene, you'll make things worse, for yourself, for humans, and for him. Let the Kaltorians handle this." Julian clenched his fists, his heart pounding with helpless frustration. He looked back at Varnax, whose chest barely rose and fell. Every instinct screamed at him to act, but the weight of the decree and Arlam's words held him back. The guards lifted the Sovereign onto a hovering stretcher, their movements precise but urgent. As they whisked him away toward the station's medical wing, Julian stood frozen, his hands trembling. "Arlam," he said finally, his voice low, "if he dies because I didn't act." Arlam's gaze was somber. "Then the galaxy will have to face the consequences of its own laws, not yours." But as they walked away, Julian couldn't shake the image of the Sovereign's ashen face, nor the nagging certainty that this crisis was far from over. The Sovereign's medical emergency cast a long shadow over Xantal 7, rippling through the station like a silent storm. Rumors spread quickly. Some said it was an assassination attempt. Others speculated it was a rare illness known only to Kaltorians. Few knew the truth, and even fewer dared to question it aloud. Julian sat in his office, his datapad abandoned on the desk. His fingers drummed in erratic rhythm against the edge of the table. Reports trickled in from the station's security channels, vague and sanitized, but one thing was clear. Sovereign Varnax's condition was deteriorating, and the Kaltorian medics were struggling. "They don't even know what they're dealing with," Julian muttered under his breath. Across the room, Arlam stood leaning against the wall, his luminous skin dimmed with unease. "You don't know that," he said. "The Kaltorians are highly advanced. They'll find a way." "Advanced doesn't mean infallible," Julian shot back. "They're trying to treat a problem they don't understand. I saw the signs. It looked like anaphylaxis. If that's the case, they're wasting precious time." "And if it isn't?" Arlam countered, his voice calm but firm. "What if you're wrong? What if your human solutions make it worse? Like with Joralin?" Julian flinched, the mention of the ambassador hitting him like a physical blow. He pushed back from his desk, standing abruptly. "I wouldn't make the same mistake. I know better now." Arlem tilted his head, his mandibles clicking faintly. "Do you? Because the Assembly doesn't think so. That's why they banned you, and whether you agree with it or not, Sovereign Varnax's life is their responsibility, not yours." Before Julian could respond, the intercom on his desk chirped, the station's clipped security voice crackling through. "Dr. Kerrigan, report to the primary security wing immediately." Julian's heart sank. What now? Arlem straightened, his translucent skin shifting to a pale hue. "That doesn't sound promising." "It never is," Julian muttered, grabbing his jacket. He made his way to the primary security wing, his mind racing with possibilities. The guards at the entrance waved him through without question, their expressions tense. Beyond the heavy doors, Julian entered a sterile chamber, illuminated by harsh white lights. Sovereign Varnax lay on a hovering medical platform, his golden skin dull and his breathing labored. A cluster of Kaltorian medics surrounded him, their tools humming softly as they worked. Advisor Calron, the Sovereign's chief aide, stood nearby, his imposing frame stiff with tension. "Dr. Kerrigan," Calron said, his voice clipped and authoritative. "You've been summoned at the Sovereign's request." Julian hesitated, glancing at the medics. They didn't look up, but their postures radiated unease. "I thought humans weren't allowed to—" "The Sovereign has invoked his right of sovereign privilege," Calron interrupted. "He wishes to speak with you." Julian stepped closer, his medical instincts kicking in as he studied Varnax's condition. The Sovereign's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, his veins faintly darkened. A clear sign of a systemic reaction. It was worse than Julian had feared. Varnax's golden eyes fluttered open, locking on to Julian with startling clarity. His voice was faint but steady. "You saw what they did not. You understand." Julian nodded, his throat tightening. "I think I do, but I need more information. What did you ingest recently? Was it something at the banquet?" Calron stiffened, his gaze narrowing. The Sovereign consumed only ceremonial nectar of honor. It is a sacred substance, used in countless rituals without incident. "Without incident for Kaltorians," Julian corrected, his tone sharper than intended. "Was it shared with anyone else?" One of the medics finally spoke up, their voice defensive. "The nectar was part of a shared diplomatic exchange. It was poured into a communal vessel and mixed with offerings from other species. There is no record of contamination." Julian's jaw tightened. No record doesn't mean no contamination. If foreign compounds entered the nectar, it could explain the reaction. His immune system is treating it as a threat. The medics exchanged uneasy glances, but Calron cut them off with a sharp gesture. "Enough. If the Sovereign wishes for Dr. Kerrigan's assistance, then he shall have it." One of the medics stepped forward, his expression grim. "If this human intervenes and fails, the consequences will be severe." Julian met the medic's gaze unflinchingly. "And if I don't intervene, he'll die." The Sovereign raised a trembling hand, silencing the argument. "Proceed," he rasped. Julian moved quickly, pulling a compact scanner from his satchel. He ran it over the Sovereign's chest, his focus narrowing as the device displayed streams of data. The readings confirmed his suspicion, an aggressive immune response, likely triggered by a foreign protein. "He needs a combination treatment," Julian said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "An epinephrine analog to stabilize his vitals and a tailored antihistamine to neutralize the reaction. Do you have anything resembling those compounds?" One of the medics hesitated. "We have epiline. It's used for neural stabilizations, but only in small doses." "It'll work," Julian said, "but I'll need to calculate the exact dosage for his physiology, and I need access to your synthesizers to create the antihistamine." The medics exchanged wary glances, but Calron nodded. "Do as he says." Julian worked with swift precision, guiding the Kaltorian medics as they prepared the compounds. The tension in the room was palpable, every movement watched closely by Calron and the guards. Finally, Julian injected the epiline into one of Varnax's veins, monitoring his vitals as the compound took effect. The Sovereign's breathing began to steady, the darkened veins receding as the reaction subsided. Julian exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. He's not out of the woods yet, but he'll recover. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Julian's words sinking in. Calron stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You've saved the Sovereign's life, Dr. Kerrigan, but this act will have far-reaching consequences." Julian met his gaze without flinching. "Then let them come. I did what needed to be done." Varnax opened his eyes, his voice faint but resolute. "You defied fear. That is what the galaxy needs." Calron's lips tightened, but he said nothing. The Sovereign's survival had changed everything, and the repercussions would soon echo across the stars. The aftermath of Sovereign Varnax's recovery unfolded like a storm brewing on the horizon. Julian barely had time to process what had happened before the station erupted in activity. Word spread quickly. A human doctor had defied the Assembly's decree to save the Kaltorian leader. The reactions were immediate and divided. Some hailed Julian as a hero, a shining example of human adaptability and ingenuity. Others condemned him as reckless, a symbol of why humanity couldn't be trusted to work within the delicate framework of galactic cooperation. Julian sat in a small conference room on Xantael 7, his head resting in his hands as Arlem stood nearby. The Lauthite's shimmering skin pulsed with faint colors, a sign of agitation. "You couldn't have done anything else," Arlem said, his voice low. "It doesn't matter," Julian replied. "The Assembly isn't going to care that I saved his life. All they're going to see is another human breaking the rules." The door slid open and Calron entered, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the room. His expression was severe, but there was a flicker of something else, reluctant respect. "The Sovereign wishes to speak with you," Calron said. Julian rose, his stomach twisting. "What does he want?" "To thank you," Calron replied, though his tone suggested there was more to it than gratitude, "and to discuss what happens next." The Sovereign's private chambers were a stark contrast to the bustling station. The air was calm, filled with the soft hum of Kaltorian technology. Varnax sat upright on an elegant medical platform, his golden skin regaining its luster. His piercing eyes locked onto Julian as soon as he entered. "Dr. Kerrigan," Varnax said, his voice steady despite his recent ordeal, "you saved my life. For that, I owe you a great debt." Julian hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I did what any doctor would do. The decree... "You nearly cost me my life," Varnax interrupted. "It is a law born of fear, not reason. Your actions have shown me that such fear is misplaced." Julian frowned. "With respect, Sovereign, not everyone sees it that way. I broke the Assembly's law, and there are people who will use that to punish humanity." "That is why I intend to fight for you," Varnax said, his tone resolute. "I will stand before the Assembly and demand the repeal of this decree. Your actions have proven that humanity's potential cannot be dismissed." Calron, standing at the edge of the room, stiffened. "Sovereign, the Assembly will not easily overturn such a decision. It was put in place with widespread support." Varnax's gaze flicked to his advisor. "Then they will face me. I am alive because of this human, and I will not allow politics to undermine what is right." Julian's chest tightened. "Sovereign, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this won't be an easy fight. The Assembly isn't just going to roll over because you make a speech." Varnax's lips curved into a faint smile. "I am well aware of the Assembly's stubbornness, Doctor. That is why I need you to join me." Julian blinked, caught off guard. "Me? I'm not a politician." "No," Varnax said. "You are something far more valuable, a witness. You will show the Assembly the truth of what humans are capable of, not as a diplomat, but as someone who acts from conviction." Julian hesitated. The idea of standing before the galaxy's most powerful governing body filled him with a mixture of dread and defiance. But he couldn't deny the importance of what Varnax was proposing. "Okay," Julian said finally. "I'll do it, but I'm not exactly known for my diplomatic skills." "Good," Varnax replied, his eyes gleaming. "The Assembly needs to hear the truth, not carefully crafted lies, and I suspect you will deliver it without hesitation." The journey to the Galactic Assembly's headquarters was uneventful, but Julian's nerves grew with each passing hour. The Assembly's central chamber was a place of overwhelming grandeur, a massive circular hall filled with tiered seats for hundreds of delegates, each representing a different species. When Julian and Varnax entered, the room buzzed with energy. Delegates turned to stare, their whispers filling the air like a rising tide. Varnax strode confidently to the center of the chamber, his golden armor gleaming under the lights. Julian followed, feeling small and out of place in his simple uniform. The Speaker of the Assembly, a crystalline entity named Lathos, presided over the proceedings. Their voice resonated throughout the chamber, calm yet commanding. "Sovereign Varnax of the Kaltorian Empire, you have invoked your right to address the Assembly. State your purpose." Varnax stood tall, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "Honored delegates, I stand before you as a survivor whose life was saved by a human doctor, a doctor who defied your decree to do what was right." The chamber erupted in murmurs, some shocked, others outraged. Varnax continued, unperturbed. "The decree forbidding humans from providing medical assistance is not a safeguard, it is a cage. It denies the galaxy the contributions of a species whose ingenuity and determination are unmatched. Dr. Kerrigan's actions are proof of this." A serpentine delegate from the Zoran Confederacy hissed loudly. "Proof of what? That humans are reckless? That they believe their methods superior to ours? Have you forgotten Jorlin's death so easily?" Julian felt a surge of anger but forced himself to remain calm. He stepped forward, addressing the chamber. "I haven't forgotten Jorlin. None of us have. But that tragedy wasn't the result of malice or arrogance. It was a mistake, one we've learned from." The Zoran delegate's scales shimmered with irritation. "And we're supposed to trust you not to make another?" Julian met their gaze, unflinching. "Trust isn't built overnight, but denying us the chance to prove ourselves does more harm than good. Sovereign Varnax is alive because I was willing to act. How many others will die if we let fear dictate our choices?" The chamber fell silent, the weight of Julian's words hanging in the air. Varnax placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. "The doctor speaks the truth. Humanity's methods may be unconventional, but their results cannot be ignored. I urge you all to reconsider this decree, not out of pity, but because it is the right thing to do." The Assembly erupted into debate, delegates arguing fiercely for and against the proposal. Julian stood at Varnax's side, bracing himself for the battle ahead. The fight to overturn the decree would not be easy, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. The galaxy was listening. The debate over the decree consumed the Assembly for days. Arguments ricocheted through the chamber, some steeped in fear and distrust, others championing the potential for progress. Julian sat in a quiet alcove with Erlem, who had rejoined him as a supporter and guide. "The Zorans won't budge," Arlem said, his translucent skin flickering with stress. "They're still clinging to Jorlin's death like a shield, and the Demar Coalition is using their opposition as leverage to demand more funding for their border patrols." Julian leaned back, rubbing his temples. "This is politics. It has nothing to do with medicine or reason." Arlem's mandibles clicked softly. "Of course it's politics, but it's also about survival, both literal and metaphorical. If you want to win this, you'll have to make them see humanity's adaptability as an asset, not a threat." Julian sighed. "And how am I supposed to do that? Half of them won't even look me in the eye, let alone listen." Arlem tilted his head thoughtfully. "Perhaps they won't listen to you, but they might listen to the Sovereign." At that moment, Calron appeared in the doorway, his imposing frame casting a long shadow. The Assembly has summoned Sovereign Varnax and Dr. Kerrigan to address the High Council. It is your last opportunity to present your case. Julian stood, his heart pounding. And if we fail? Calron's gaze was unreadable. Then the decree will stand, and humanity's role in the Assembly will remain diminished. You may also face personal sanctions for your actions. Julian swallowed hard but nodded. Then we won't fail. The High Council chamber was an intimidating space, smaller than the main assembly hall but far more imposing. The councilors, representatives of the galaxy's most powerful factions, sat in a semicircle on elevated platforms, their faces cloaked in shadow. Varnax stepped forward, his golden armor gleaming even in the dim light. Julian followed, acutely aware of the weight of their every step. "Sovereign Varnax," the speaker intoned, their crystalline voice reverberating. "You may begin." Varnax inclined his head, his voice calm but firm. "Honored counselors, you know why I am here. I stand as living proof of the injustice of the decree against humanity. Without Dr. Kerrigan's intervention, I would not be standing before you today." A counselor from the Zoran Confederacy hissed, their serpentine body coiling tightly. "You speak of survival, Sovereign, but what of the risks? Humanity's methods are reckless, their biology unpredictable. Jorlin's death is a testament to that." Julian stepped forward, his voice steady despite his nerves. Joralin's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't the result of recklessness. It was a lack of understanding. Since then, we've dedicated ourselves to studying your physiology and developing safeguards. The decree doesn't protect you, it prevents progress. Another counselor, a massive being with skin like molten rock, rumbled. "And yet, how can we trust your kind? You act without permission, defy laws, and claim it is for the greater good. What assurance do we have that you will not do so again?" Julian's jaw tightened, but Varnax spoke before he could. "Assurance comes not from words, but from actions. Dr. Kerrigan acted because the law was unjust, and his actions saved my life. If we cannot recognize such bravery and competence, we doom ourselves to stagnation." The speaker's voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. "And what do you propose, Sovereign? A complete repeal of the decree, or a modification?" Varnax turned to Julian, his golden eyes gleaming. "What would you suggest, Doctor?" Julian hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on him. Then he straightened. "Repealing the decree entirely may be too much for the Assembly to accept, but modifying it to allow collaboration between humans and alien medics, that could work. We're not asking to replace your expertise, only to contribute to it." The chamber fell silent. The counselors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, the speaker spoke. "The proposal is noted. The High Council will deliberate and render its decision." The waiting was excruciating. Julian paced the halls outside the chamber, his nerves frayed. Arlem and Calron stood nearby, each silent in their own thoughts. When the doors finally opened, the speaker emerged, their crystalline form shimmering faintly. "The High Council has reached a decision," the speaker announced. "The decree prohibiting humans from providing medical assistance to non-human species will be repealed. In its place, a new framework will be established, allowing for supervised collaboration between human and alien medics under strict guidelines." Relief flooded Julian, and he exhaled deeply. The speaker continued. "Dr. Kerrigan, your actions have demonstrated the potential for humanity to contribute to the Assembly's shared goals. But your defiance of the law must not be overlooked. Consider this a warning. Future violations will not be tolerated." Julian nodded, his voice steady. "Understood. Thank you." Varnax stepped forward, his presence commanding. "The galaxy owes a debt to Dr. Kerrigan. His courage and conviction have paved the way for progress. Let us not squander this opportunity." In the weeks that followed, the new framework was implemented across the Assembly's territories. Julian found himself busier than ever, traveling between stations and planets to help establish collaborative medical programs. He worked side by side with alien doctors, sharing knowledge and learning in return. One day, as Julian reviewed patient files aboard a new medical outpost, Varnax visited him. The Sovereign looked healthier than ever, his golden skin radiant. "You've come a long way, Dr. Kerrigan," Varnax said, his tone warm. "So have you," Julian replied, setting down his tablet. Varnax chuckled. "Indeed. But this is only the beginning. There is much work to be done, and the galaxy will look to you, and to humanity, for leadership in the years to come." Julian smiled, a quiet sense of pride settling over him. "We won't let you down." As the Sovereign departed, Julian turned back to his work, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time, he felt humanity had truly earned its place among the stars, not as newcomers, but as equals, and he knew the best was yet to come.